All right, I'll call the public hearing back to order, please. We are on item 5 of the public hearing, council questions of the applicant. Now, just a little administrative. Is there going to be someone in particular that answers, or it depends on the question you pop up? Okay, so you might want, and you can move a chair if you want, you might want to you have to be on the mic so that people can hear the answers. So if you are going to answer the question, you can just pop up and go over there. All right, so we've heard a lot of comments and feedback today and over the last little while, and I will open it up to council for any questions of the applicant. Councillor Faubert.
Surprise. Have a question. I'm assuming that you've read the record of submissions, and in particular, Bow Valley Climate Action submission. And I was hoping that someone from the proposed project could kind of speak to their concerns around not having enough language around increasing energy efficiency in the built form. And I recognize that we can't require anything above and beyond the building code, but this might be an opportunity to sort of address that concern. Thank you.
Your Worship, members of council. Yeah. My name is Chris Sparrow. I'm an architect with MTA. I know we've spoken previously. It's a great question that's been raised. And when it comes to sustainability, we're seeing an awful lot of movement right now in different technologies that are available, different approaches. We have different opportunities on this site that are available to us as well, given the location on the valley bottom. And we want to keep all of those options in front of us. In addition, I would like to mention too that we did explore earlier in different design iterations, the possibility of having more buildings, but smaller buildings. And we know that the more units we can put in a building, we can amortize the efficiency of the envelope to more units and create a more sustainable development that way as well. So in part, that's why we have less buildings, but they're slightly larger.
So it would be fair to say that the way that section's written in the ARP is to provide flexibility for future planning, not to not have a commitment towards energy efficiency?
Correct, absolutely. Yeah, there are, I think we can all agree that in the future, passive house, net zero, those levels of sustainability are going to be required by building codes. And so the development industry is already actively looking at the technologies to be able to deliver that level of sustainability in a cost-effective way. And we want to leave ourselves open to explore what all of the possibilities are at the time we get into detailed design to ensure that we can deliver cost effectively, meet the objectives of CRPS, CCH, and the community at the same time.
Right. Thank you. Mike, I have a question about Mr. Sparks actually said it very well. We are in a housing crisis in Canmore. And it seems that CRPS and the town may have a shared interest in ensuring that market units are maintained as a primary residence as opposed to second homes. I'm just wondering, there was some comments about some concerns about any restrictions, but I'm just wondering, given the precedent that CCH has set with leases and that the BAMF has with leases, would there be any openness to placing a condition in the lease as to be used as a primary residence only?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we talk that over, and I know I'm going to repeat just a little bit of what I said earlier, we have a desire in that first push to make it available to currently people who are here. I know in theory, in conversations with people who've asked us about that, I've said, but I don't know what'll come 5 years or 7 years down the line when they come to sell. What we would like to do is do everything we can in law that guarantees our charter rights to buy property, move property, sell property, and do all of that as best we can. Speaking beyond that would be speaking beyond the law as we know it today. So it would be unfair for us to speculate, in a sense, wildly or foolishly into that territory. If we can, and I know I'm going to link this to another conversation I've had with others around the endowment fund, we will do everything we can to make sure those dollars reside within the valley. I've been on foundations before. There's ways the laws allow us to do that against some fear that we may lose those dollars to some other organizational entity in the future. In other words, future school boards in regionalizations, and that happens. But there are ways to deal with that. So to get to the heart of your question, within the purview of the law, that we're able to do so, we will attempt to do so. Anything beyond that, I'm promising what I can't deliver.
So just
Yeah.
to be clear, what I'm referencing
Yeah.
is, because you've indicated that it's likely to be the ownership of the lands to remain with the school board.
Absolutely,
And there would
without
be a
question.
lease mechanism. There's various models
Yeah.
out there. Lease mechanism that's actually sold to the buyer, long-term lease and whatnot. So they're essentially owners,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily own the land.
Full
Just
limit.
like, you see that with Banff, you see that in CCH, you see that in, I think, you're referring to the university model.
We are, the
Yeah.
university lands, UFC.
So I'm just wondering, is within that model, there is potentially an opportunity to say that, ownership must remain a primary residence, whether by rent or ownership,
If you can help us craft that language, you're a lawyer.
so,
You know,
well, anyway, so
I know what you're
there's an
saying.
openness to
Yes,
that conversation.
absolutely, without question.
Thank
Okay?
you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
I
Yeah.
appreciate that. All right, Councillor Ma.
And sorry, my apologies. I should have tried to. I should
Don't leave.
have tried to snag you before
We're good.
you headed off there.
Thank you.
With regards to the 80 market units,
Yeah.
This is kind of like riffing a little bit off of Mayor Krausser was talking about. I feel your 20 staff units could be consumed quite quickly, which is great because you guys have the facility and the space to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And then it leads on to that surplus, where it is, say, teachers that are in a situation where perhaps they are outside of the realm
Mm-hmm.
of PAH, perhaps their partner has a certain job, but they're in that horrible sweet spot, which is not so sweet,
Mm-hmm.
where, typical market is out. And so I'm motivated to see if there's ways that you guys can find ways so that locals, whether they're local teachers, like other local families, people wanting to be here, if there is some mechanism that we can
I
set up
hear
for
you.
there.
Yeah. As they say, if somebody finds themselves in that financial spot, they may not want to live in staff housing, right? It's too mature a couple. They want something different. What they may want is to build equity. So they're going to buy one of the 80 units. They're not going to go into staff housing.
That's fine.
If that's some of our staff, that's the first level clientele. They're actually saying to us they want to stay a long time, not a short time. So that would be desirable.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
because I feel like, echoing a little bit what Councillor Graham was saying, with this unique opportunity with CRPS being such a great stewardship of our community, it would be, I think in many ways, a bit of a disappointing outcome if we had 80 dark homes. And if there are mechanisms where, and even myself personally, I feel for you guys, if there are mechanisms that provide opportunities that get local families in, chances are local families will more likely have local children that will go through your school board, which will also help ensure the viability of your board, which I'm really interested in.
Yeah.
So,
I'm almost afraid of teasing out the notion of 80 dark units. I've got to get Sparks onto that because they wouldn't be dark for long, and I'm only going to tease Dan in that way. The notion of having 80 available pieces of inventory going dark for any length of period of time defies the 50 years I've been in the community. I've never seen that. So I think to us it's a question of this discussion in phase one. How do we get things going? Try to bring as many of the people we seem to be talking about in the first phase into the mix and go from there. It's interesting because if there are empty units and you look at the business model, and some of you are very sharp on this too, we've misread the market. Something's gone wrong. things don't stay dark here for long. So that's where we're coming from. How do we make this desirable, in the first go-around?
I defer to the black belt, Joanna McCallum.
Sure, good. Chris, go ahead.
I think there's another piece to add into this too. It's my understanding when developers come in and take over a piece of property, they're developing it to the maximum financial revenue they can get. We're looking at configurations, as you heard, studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms. We're not going for the sweet spot for a developer, we're going for the sweet spot for us. And when you go into those studio or 1 bedroom pieces, that's going to open it up for a teacher, like you heard, that there's 2 salaries. So there's that piece. We do have, as I mentioned too, and Brian has, we're open to talking about more affordable housing units. But we need those funds to even build our own, guys, and to service the land. That's not a small piece of money, building 20 units. So that's a big component of this. And if we were to look at what we're looking at now, I'm not sure, Jeff, we would be able to rent 20, to be quite honest with you. We know our staff quite well. In fact, we may be partnering with the town for some of their staff members to be in there. The rental piece, I'm not sure we'll have 20. So that's something to be determined down the road.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Mera.
Mayor Crowser, but my question has been answered, so thank you.
Okay. Councillor Graham.
Yeah, I'm going to continue on the primary residence theme. I've said this before and I'll say it again, but if a single unit of that is a vacant home that we've traded a schoolyard for, that will be disappointing, in my view. Living in South Canmore, I see us tear down little old homes on a regular basis. We put up huge fourplexes, and density is fantastic. However, in those fourplexes, 1 person might live in them, and the other 3 are typically vacant second homes. To me, as Mr. Sparks alluded to earlier, the fact that there could be a mechanism within the lease had very little effect on market pricing, yet had a dramatic effect on who actually lives there and seeing people actually live there. So that piece to me is extremely important, and getting that right is critical to this project to me, and I would love to see us come to find some sort of mechanism to do that, if at all possible.
Is there a question, or?
I was getting to a question, I think.
I think we got it. Okay. Yeah, sure.
I'll move along. I just want to make that statement, I think.
And just to respond to that, Wade, we respect where you're coming from, because that's the foundation we're coming from too, obviously. It really isn't a schoolyard. I'll just state that. The principal has stated that too, and a number of other people have stated that today, where it's not the case, although we've used it over COVID times for cohorting for that. In fact, it's been problematic, that piece of land to us, for people who think it's a dog park and don't pick up after their animals. There's a whole, and we've locked off the fence, and they still break the locks on us. We've had that happen. There is a worry or a concern on our part, where if we're looking for the second buyers who are coming in, that it has to be primary, we do believe there'll be a hindrance in our sales and revenue that would challenge us. So in selling the initial sell. So that's something we have to consider in the whole piece as we move through. And you heard us say our first offer is going to be to the staff and our communities and everybody else there first too. So, and hopefully we can work with groups to have more affordable housing within that, but that'll be determined as we get past this stage, if we do. So.
If I may continue.
Yep.
One of the concerns we heard time and time again was density. We've gone from, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 or 6 buildings to now 8? 7 to 8, yeah. And we are in that upper end of the R4 density that is allowed in that unit. What would lowering the density look like for your project?
Well, in the proposal that you've seen, in the planning that's been done to date, I mean, the information in the ARP document is fairly high level. You have seen some preliminary massing as well. What's not in there, what's not described in detail in there, because we'll refine it further in the next stage, in the next 2 stages of development, is what that unit mix is. And so the unit mix that's considered in achieving that 120 unit target includes studios, 1 bedrooms, 1 bedroom plus den, 2 bedroom, 2 bedroom plus den, and 3 bedroom units in a fairly equivalent mix all the way across the board. And that direction was given to us at the beginning of the project by CRPS because they have to be neighbors. They're building their own neighbor, basically, and they want it to be a community. They want to have the opportunity within the development for people to come into a 1 bedroom. Hey, I love it here. Let's get into a 2 bedroom or a 2 bedroom plus den. We also want to be mindful that early accessible housing units that are less than 1,000 square feet are ideal in Canmore to keep prices low. And so by bringing the density level up, by having a mix of smaller and larger units, we can kind of offer that whole spectrum to the community.
Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for coming and answering questions from Council. I wanted to jump off of what Councillor Ma was asking because I don't think the question was quite understood, Mr. Callahan. The concern isn't about dark homes in terms of those units being like unoccupied by a buyer. The concern is that they're going to be consumed by second homeowners and therefore left dark for part of the time, any of the time. And we see large swaths of certain neighborhoods in Canmore that are similar to that. And there's parts of South Canmore, quite frankly, that are much like that. I go walking at night with my dogs during the week, and you see quite a bit of that. So I think from a sustainability perspective, the question is more around looking at the market inventory that you're proposing, not the non-market, the market inventory, and wondering if it is possible to see some of that, if not all of that, pinned to a similar scheme that they use in Banff to ensure that housing for Banffites stays for Banffites, much like housing for Canmorites stays for Canmorites, or Bow Valleyites, whichever you want to term it. And that's, I think, the question, if I'm correct, Councillor Ma, that was being asked. How are we going to prevent that from occurring?
Anyone? What's the Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Anyone? Anyone?
Who's got the magic?
Yeah, who's got the magic?
And to be fair, and it's been, and to be fair, and thank you, and to be fair, it has been brought up by the mayor that there are, like, we see it in Banff, we see it in University District, we do, if you've had the ability to retain ownership of the housing and just do lifelong leases for those lands, then there is the ability to do this. The mechanics are there. It's about the will.
So it's Lori Van Royen.
I know.
I am the owner's rep for CRPS, for the record.
You must be sick of looking at us.
It's all good. It's all good. So yes, I will say this is unique. This is going to be a unique mechanism for CRPS because the land needs to be maintained as ownership stake. We have been exploring different opportunities with different partners to see how we could make this work, where we have made some commitments today to sell to Canmore first. And we're also weighing it with the marketability. So our ability to get maximum value out of the 80 units to support the legacy fund, and also finding a way to what both Chris and Brian have talked about, which is to have families live there where their children will come to the school. And so I think, I can't tell you what that is today, Joanna, to be honest, but I can tell you that we're exploring it because I think the values are there. They're the same. There's a value alignment between Canmore Town and CRPS. but not at the stake of losing market value. And so if there is a way forward on that, I think we're going to find it.
I think that there is, and I would just like to say that I guess it depends on your goals. If you're looking, there's a lot of people in Canmore that can afford market housing, but can't afford to get into the bidding wars that are happening.
Absolutely.
And so when you're a person looking to buy market housing, and you are not just competing with the 3% of growth that's happening in your community, but with that and the rest of the world, right? That is an impossible situation. So yes, it's not even about affordability, it's about, how did somebody put it? Inventory. It's about having inventory. And this, in my mind, is really great inventory to have for Canmore local people. And so I think that not all of us, maybe all of us, I don't know, really have a vested interest in trying to keep this for, like the affordable housing piece, fantastic. Income appropriate, whatever we want to call it. Fantastic, love it, you know me. But there's also this like preserving housing for Canmore people who can afford to be in the market. We've seen lots of people move into Spring Creek, which is market housing, and sell their market house and do their lateral move or whatever. We've seen other developments like that occur. I can't imagine why we wouldn't want to try and do that with this project. And out of the gate, when you first talked to me about this 3 years ago, you talked about the university land structure. There's a reason for that, I can tell. And so I would really like to see how that can be built upon.
Well, and I will say the university structure is a little different from Redwood Meadows and Banff. So that's long-term use.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's not necessarily, I mean, it is ownership in a way, but it isn't. But the university district actually is ownership of the house, not the land. And so it's leases on subleases. And so
Same
it's a
thing with our
complicated
PH
thing.
structure, as you know, right?
Yes, exactly. And so if there's mechanisms for us to be able to look at that, it serves the town, but it also serves CRPS. But again, we're going to look at that market rate. We have to look at all of it. And to be quite honest, we have not done that yet. We have looked at the structure, but we haven't actually looked at the market and how we create that. We have lots of homework to still do on that. But I still say, I think I heard a commitment to have a look at it and see where we can work together to make it happen.
And maybe it's not all of the 80.
And maybe it's not all of the 80.
Maybe it's half the 80.
Maybe it's some. We don't know that.
You can play with those numbers. It's the real estate market in the valley, and everywhere actually in the country, is so volatile.
It also may be partners that we're working with.
And you have already alluded to the fact that you have partners.
We do have partners that are not necessarily developers.
No.
They're actually people that would purchase the homes who work and want to live and work in the valley. And so that has been a strategy of ours from the very beginning, is to get those partners on side. And we've got good partnerships with them now. There may be others. When we spoke with Karsten about the affordable housing piece, would there be any reason why they couldn't put a submission in a competitive process? Absolutely not. And so we are open to all of that. We understand how important this land is. We understand how important the messages that you've said today. So we need to work through it. We just don't have the answers right now.
This parcel.
So I'm just going to.
Sorry, go ahead.
You have another question?
I just wanted to make a quick statement. This parcel, and what we do, not just in Canmore, but in general, having grown up in social housing myself, we like to put social housing, we like to ghettoize it, firstly, and, or used to. Hopefully we stopped doing that, because that's not best practices. But I've heard a lot of comments today and read last night about people wanting to see it somewhere else. And I've heard the somewhere else argument for my entire political career, and it doesn't hold any water in my mind. But what we do really poorly is we take lands that will provide people the most amount of affordability in terms of transportation, walking, climate, poverty, all of those things, and we hand them over to people who need it the least, who need that affordability the least. And that is what I would like to prevent from happening. So that's all I have to say.
Councillor Ma.
Ladies.
Can I add one piece in here? And I'll ask Lori and Chris if I'm accurate in this piece, because I've thought about this piece many times, because there was some initial questions about how do you plan to start this? And it's going to be staged, obviously. I think there may be an assumption, or we're working off an assumption, that it'll all be developed at once. And that's a big difference in my mind, because you go 1 year or a chunk of time, then those offers, again, go to first-time Canmore people each time. So it's not all 80 coming on at once, and then you only have 30 Canmore people that can afford. When there's a separation in time, you'll get more people who qualify over those time periods too, where you speak about maybe a partial. Yeah, thanks. I'm not a developer, I'm an educator. So I think that's an important piece, I would think, over time, that when that phasing occurs, that leaves it open for new people who come online who are local to have that first dib each time.
Yeah, great. Councillor Ma.
Okay. Yep. I think Joanna did a fine job there, as always. We have a question back for the proponents. And, you know, like, I hear where you guys are coming from. You need to extract value from the market units. And we're coming from a place of market units with a local bent. Because, hey, like, I love the different form factors, the 1 bedroom, the 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. But I think for us to naively think that this 1 bedroom is not going to appeal to someone in Calgary that's just got enough money to buy this as their second pad is disingenuous. Like, when it hits the market, you know, we need that piece to, like, help make this a locals place. I have a question about perpetuity. Like, there's been some dialogue here about how, you know, first time we go out, we're going to release it out to Canmore locals. I think that's admirable. That I'm curious what happens 5-6 years down the road. Like, it's very possible that a Canmore person could buy this and 2 months later, flip it to someone else from somewhere else. And we've lost the perpetuity piece, and in short order, or maybe 10 years down the road, this is now a unit or a complex that's got our 20 fantastic affordable units, we've got our 20 great staff units, and it's just by evolution or devolution, I think would be a better word to say, back to like an 80 weekender home complex.
So I do believe that that question's been answered multiple times. What I'm hearing is that and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing that there's an openness to the discussion. It has to meet your objectives, hopefully it can meet town objectives, but there's an openness to looking at those things that could potentially provide that perpetuity.
And I just want to confirm that perpetuity piece as opposed to just the first shot, which is admirable if it's only the first shot.
Councillor Ma, the perpetuity piece means the land must be owned by CRPS in perpetuity.
Yeah.
That's the word that we were using perpetuity for.
Right, and thank you, Ms. Riom. And the context I was looking at perpetuity was how the sales afterwards would be treated within perpetuity as well. Right. So not just first sale through Canmore locals, but, you know, subsequent times, the future owners move on. It's to another family member, or sorry, to another like possible potential Bill Valley family that could drive a child through the school system and help everyone's cause. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Councillor Graham.
I got 2 things, but I'll just go with 1 for now. If there was an opportunity to do more affordable homes with some sort of land swap, and I'm not saying there isn't land available. There may or may not be. We'll ask administration of that later. But if there was an opportunity to do that and swap CRPS for other lands that the town owned to go to 100% affordable housing, would that be something that CRPS would entertain?
So we're actually not interested in land because we have some. We're interested in cash that goes into an endowment that then supports the school board in terms of innovation and programs. So land somewhere else isn't necessarily going to help us because we're not developers and we're not going to build on that land. So that's kind of, I mean, I know that was put out by Karsten and others, the land transfers, and we're just saying we don't really need the land. What we do need is the money coming in to support innovative programming in the Bow Valley. That's really what we need. Now, if the group came together and said, you know, they wanted to build another 20 affordable housing, and they could, and they made us whole, there's not a problem there. And we talked about that with Karsten, about how he might do that. So I know he's got some ideas. And so there's nothing to say that they can't be somebody that responds to our RFP, which is what we're planning to do, is to put it out to an RFP so that we can get the most competitive price, the best developers, hopefully local, to do the work. But it's got to be competitive from our perspective. So that's really our intent.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
If I may, one more? Just some clarity on the staff ACOM. Will it be one building will be phased in throughout the project? Just some clarity, if somebody might please. Thank you.
Correct, yes, it will be one building. Where it will land in the phasing is yet to be determined, but it will be one building, and it's considered to be the building that's just north of LGMS access from 5th.
What would be the hope of when that building comes online?
Okay, so just, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can answer if you want, but this is way, way, way down in the planning process. So, like phasing, what buildings look like, all of that stuff. So I would hope nobody's making any decisions based on something that will be dealt with 2 or 3 steps down the road. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions of council? Seeing none, thank you very much to all of you for all of your, oh, you have a question? I'm sorry, Councillor Ma?
2 questions.
We'll just stay here, Councillor Mo. I'll stay here.
I don't wait till you guys walk over and hit the button. It's just sometimes just like his worship misses it, that's all, and that's my fault. I should hit it sooner. A question back for Mr. Sparrow. On the design side, while we're going back towards, say, GHG, as we move forward, does this project have a little bit of an eye towards what's happening for EV charging for vehicles, as opposed to doing the costly or maybe challenging retrofit down the road? Where is this at in terms of that piece?
Again, that's another detail that gets discussed later on, but generally speaking now, given the popularity of EVs, most developments that we're working on are roughing in for that to be added by owners in the future at their own expense.
Yeah, I had asked that question at the first reading, and because it mentions in there about there'd be a portion that would have fit, and the answer was that they'd all be roughed in. So.
Yeah.
And then my last question perhaps would go back to perhaps Superintendent McPhee or Mr. Callahan or someone else. Given that you guys are holding the land into perpetuity, which is fantastic, which makes this such a special opportunity, and there are a lot of noble values exposed in your policies. Like, look at your policies here, and there's lots of great things talking about local elements and such. Would you be willing to enshrine those noble values as we go through the process with our town administration as we figure out the pieces on that land transfer of that strip of laneway?
Do you mind repeating that, Jeff, please?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Councilor
So,
Lott.
yeah, that's fine. Jeff totally works. And then so,
apologize.
yeah, I was just saying there's some like fantastic policies that I see here, right? And there's a lot of great potential within this project for helping like the local community. And so as we go through some of these elements we've been speaking about, such as like various locals clauses, setting it up so that into perpetuity, would you be willing to work with town administration to lock in these noble community values throughout the process as we go for the land transaction piece?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I have two.
Are you willing to deal, is what I'm
Lori and I
saying.
both can answer that. I think we're on the
Yeah.
right, you know, I would say that's how we function already, Jeff.
Okay.
We're the ones that donated the land for the daycare. We're the ones that added the extra land that was needed that cost the school division $900,000 for Canmore Collegiate. That's how we function. And I think to expect anything differently wouldn't be fair, because that's how we work, and that's how we've always worked, and that's our community, and this is what we're doing this for. So the policies themselves, I'm sure they can be interpreted a few different ways, as any words can be, but that's always been our intention.
Okay.
So,
Thank you,
Lori,
sir.
do you have anything to add to that?
Just to add that, you know, we thought a lot about those policies when we were crafting them, because as Chris said, they're very much part of our values too. What I would say is that we've committed to today is have a discussion. We did not commit today to put residency clauses on the titles. And so we are absolutely committed to having that discussion to figure out how we can do this. I don't know if the residency thing is the right way. I don't know what that looks like, but we are committed to the discussion. And so I think that's what we've committed to in the ARP as well.
Okay. Thank you.
So just to be clear, the words that are in the ARP, if it's accepted, are being adopted.
Yes.
So I'm not sure what you're asking about further on. So that's why I was.
Okay.
Any other questions of council? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now it is time, administration, based on what you've heard, are there any closing comments that you would like to make? Mr. Fish?
You've heard quite a bit, so I don't feel there's anything important to add, but I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Don't go far, because I suspect there will be some questions. All right, with that then, we'll move to council questions of administration. I'm going to start there's a clarity question. We heard a lot of feedback about lack of open space and community space. The ARP refers to the entire parcel, 1, 2, and 3, that includes the school, includes the daycare, includes the gardens and all that stuff. So we have to look at, when we look at open space, am I correct that we have to judge the space on the parcel?
I think that's for council to decide. I mean, the development is certainly proposed on parcel 2 of the 3 parcels. Yeah, where one draws that boundary is important. Same thing around the density question. Where one draws the exact boundary is quite important, and it can change it significantly based on where that boundary is drawn.
Great. I have a question. We've been talking about the potential discussions around residency requirements. Where in the process is it best to deal with that? Is that something that should be dealt with at this level? Is it something that's dealt at a future level? From a planning point of view, where is the best place? Or is it either?
I think Ms. Smithers might want to jump in and save me from hanging myself with this rarely worn tie.
Good pass. So I would suggest that a statutory document like an area redevelopment plan is not an appropriate place for that discussion, because that really deals with tenure or form of occupancy, where at a ARP level, we're really looking at a concept for land use across the site. And as you know, the MGA precludes us from getting into talking about tenure as part of a policy discussion. That being said, I've definitely heard loud and clear from most, if not all, of council that some attention to some form of local residency requirement is an important consideration for council. So I'd certainly be open to, and I think this has actually come up with the applicant, I'd certainly be open to the town engaging with the applicant on a discussion outside of this statutory framework around the best way to achieve that. And then I would suggest, even given where we get with that, that might inform council's decision on future readings of this or the subsequent laneway land transfer, which is also, as a land transaction, would need to come back to council, because the process that we'd be following for that goes outside of what is currently stipulated in council's policy on land transactions. So I would say there is an opportunity for those discussions. It sounds like the applicant is willing to engage in those discussions, and this area redevelopment plan, I would suggest, is not the appropriate vehicle to drive those discussions.
Thank you. Councillor Faubert.
Yay. First, I apologize, Mr. Fish, for asking you questions during public presentations. I should have waited till now. But I was hoping you could, when you talked about density, you used a unit per hectare measurement. You know, what's appropriate for considering density in terms of a quantitative analysis at this phase? Why do you use that measure, and how would you respond to some of the calculations that were presented by the public?
So units per hectare or units per acre are the sort of standard measurements of density. The R4 district that surrounds the site to the west, south, and east has a minimum and a maximum density, and that's based on units per hectare. Sometimes it will be done on number of dwelling units per square meter, but it is essentially the same thing. The range in the R4 district is a minimum of 49 units per hectare up to a maximum of 98 units. The purpose statement of the R4 district is for medium density housing. So when calculating the density on the parcel 2 site, the proposed 120 units over that approximately 1.5 hectare yields about 78, 79 units per hectare. So it falls within the range of the R4 district that surrounds the development. I heard some different numbers today, as low as 26 units per hectare on the adjacent Elk Run Homes developments, Cafaro Fusion, Cafaro, the other Cafaro development. If I look at what was calculated when those development permits were applied for and received, there are 20 units on 0.245 of a hectare. So the density comes out around 80 units per hectare. Now, that's only on the privately owned land, not the laneway, the adjacent streetways. Parcel 2 also doesn't include 4th Street, 7th Avenue, anything else, but it does include a number of the internal roadways to the site. So on one hand, that kind of decreases the density, but on the other hand, it is a comprehensive site that is designed and developed. So I guess I just make that point that the Elk Run Homes, the adjacent developments to the east, those developments would have a slightly lower density if you included the laneway between them and potentially 6th Avenue, 5th Street, some of those other areas. Even though so where you draw that boundary is significant, and I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but it can change the outcome. There's a great book we had to read at university called How to Lie with Statistics. So I'm not suggesting that that be done, but I'm just saying that what your inputs and outputs are, you can arrive at a different kind of outcome.
Well, right, and I mean, I know a lot of people were trying to address like what the density is, what it should be, and I think I'm looking for sort of like what, as council, we should be using as a guide for our decision making. And I know that the R4 district is an important consideration. A lot of people used what is currently existing in the neighborhood, which I think does factor into some of the MDP sections, which leads to my next question. In terms of 6.1.11, how would this development be sensitive to the density scale and character of the neighborhood? So I know there's some opinion around whether it is or isn't as set out in the MDP, and from your professional opinion, I would like to consider that.
If I could have the screen, please. So there was really one question, but I want to come back to it was a sort of pseudo first question there, about what to use to judge that. Ultimately, these decisions are political decisions, and so council has to make the decisions. There's no easy yes or no checkbox. The municipal development plan, I think, does a particularly good job at this point, and full credit to Ms. Wojtenko for capturing the essence of this struggle between the need to expand the supply of housing and the desire to manage the impacts of change on existing neighborhoods. And that is difficult. So your second question comes to this point around maintaining the character of the existing neighborhoods. And I've had a lot of conversations with the residents who feel very strongly that this application does not do that. It's somewhat subjective as to what that is. So we can look at some objective numbers like density and height and setbacks, but even those are sometimes fraught with challenges. So I think in terms of evaluating how the development fits into the existing neighborhood, I think there are some, and this is the presentation from first reading, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit to some of the aspects of the development that have tried to minimize the impact on the development and fit in with the neighborhood. Whether or not that succeeds, that's council's decision to make. So, as we all know, the 5 bluer buildings match the existing height in the area. The yellow buildings are taller, so arguably they do not, but they are set back further. The R4 district has a 1.5 meter side yard setback. The proposed area would have a 6 meter setback for buildings of of similar size. Where the buildings are taller, the yellow building to the north, there's a proposed additional setback to 12 meters. So are those adequate measures on the development fitting into the existing neighborhood? That's for the 7 of you to decide.
I have more, but I will let my colleagues
Okay.
have a chance at you.
Councillor Mara.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fish, for answering all our questions. There's been a lot of talk about what's happening above ground. I'm going to go in the other direction. There was a couple mentions in our public submissions, written submissions, concern about infrastructure. So mainly water and sewer. So my understanding is the responsibility of the applicant to, you could explain maybe where the cost for them is. Is it just in the hookup? Is it upgrading any lines that might need to be upgraded? And when we do upgrade, do we do it to just 100% capacity allowing the building, or do we even look for future growth?
So I'm going to try and answer those.
Yes.
At first reading, Brian Kinsey provided a much better description of the municipal infrastructure than I have. So I will do my best to.
Yeah,
it's not that complicated because I'm not actually approving detailed plans, but the water services are near capacity, is my understanding. But it seems like there would be space in that capacity. So it's getting close, but more study would be required. The sanitary is currently very close to capacity, sometimes in excess of capacity. So there are concerns around that. As part of the submission, there was an appendix, a technical report, that outlined a number of options for dealing with the sanitary capacity in the area. In some cases in one scenario, that would include an additional service line that would be separate from the existing infrastructure that would deal with just the proposed development. That cost would entirely be borne by whomever is undertaking the development, the developer. Other scenarios where there were general improvements to the municipal infrastructure there, that cost would largely, if not exclusively, be borne by the developer. If there was a demonstrated benefit to a larger area that came from that, then that cost may be shared to some degree with the town. That would be a matter of negotiation. You had one other question around building to capacity. So we're currently working on, the town already has a utility master plan, and that generally forecasts areas where new infrastructure, utility infrastructure, are anticipated to be required, and they are built for that higher capacity. So we would look at, in an almost lot by lot, well, literally actually a lot by lot basis. Okay, there's one home there now. The zoning allows for 3 to 6 homes. We're going to guess 4.5 homes. And that is done for that entire catchment of that infrastructure facility. So, sorry, that was a very long answer to say, yes, we look into the future. We don't just build it to today's need. We look at anticipated growth.
Thank you for your answer. I think you answered it fully, so thank you.
Well, hopefully Mr. Kinsey isn't at home screaming at his monitor.
Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Mr. Fish, for answering our questions. Going through the public submissions, amongst the submissions where people were, say, against the project, there was a high sense of anxiety towards parking and this idea of like spillover. And as we know in Canmore, we were given garages, but a lot of them become gearages, and there's no cars, and they're full of stuff. What sort of mechanisms would administration use to help ensure or to help control this like fear of like, or it could be a real fear of vehicle spillover into the neighboring streets?
So the application has proposed to meet the land use bylaw requirements. The land use bylaw was revised in 2019. The final approval was in 2019, and it did decrease the parking standards. So I think that is what's giving the community some concern around that.
Mm-hmm.
It is somewhat untested on such a large scale as is being proposed here. But what I'm hearing is concern with what's in the land use bylaw, not necessarily with what's in the proposal. Now they're somewhat the same. I think it would have a significant impact on the development if they were to propose providing additional parking. Mm-hmm. It could be done because it would likely result in a direct control land use district. So if approved, there would be more information coming later, but it's difficult because the ARP points towards the existing standards. Mm-hmm. That said, all of that said, administration has had conversations sharing this concern with the applicant. There have been no commitments made to date, but there has been some conversation about different kinds of vehicle parking and storage areas to discourage that garage. I hadn't heard that one before.
Yeah.
I quite like that. Whereby it's actually largely providing sort of a garage and a half of space. Mm-hmm. So it gives you space to store gear, Christmas decorations, whatever else, and still use it for parking. So additionally, when there is only one parking stall, people tend to use it more than if they have a garage and a driveway. Then, in my observation, it tends to be used less.
Okay. And so, yeah, because like at this current point, I'm fine with like the one stall per unit piece. I was just curious on the size, like, are there things down the road, such as like parking restrictions onto the main street, just ensure? And so I was just curious if the administration's had experience with that or any of those techniques. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, and I meant to say one other thing. There is a visitor parking requirement as well, so it's not literally one for one. There would be some additional visitor parking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you, Mayor Krauser. Thank you for your presentation, all the great answers so far. We've heard a lot about Section 6 of the NDP for reasons why this doesn't necessarily fit within the current neighborhood. But Section 6.1.10 says where significant redevelopment is being proposed throughout an existing neighborhood or area of town, which would result in, for example, amendments to the land use bylaw to accommodate an increased density or upgrades to municipal infrastructure, an area redevelopment plan should be prepared at the discretion of council or direction of council. So with that, is that essentially saying that it does fit statistically within the R4 district for density, but is there actually technically a little bit of leeway in the fact that you could actually see an increased density above R4 technically, because if we're going by what the MDP says, that to me, that's what that section says, is that, because again, it wasn't R4 before, it used to be single family homes, so if we kept with the single family homes, we wouldn't have R4. So basically there's an evolution here, so I get the concerns that this increased density will be too much, but people are defending the reasons against it with the same section, but they leave out that part. So am I reading that correctly? Is that how I should be understanding it, that basically there could actually be an increased density above what's even there currently?
So the change that's proposed here kind of comes back to the existing zoning in terms of it being a public use district. So that doesn't have a density attached to it, so it's somewhat difficult to compare the proposed change in this case. The existing district has setbacks of, I believe it's 3 meters, but also a height of 11 meters. Sorry, the existing setbacks may be 6, I think it's 6, and a height of 11 meters. So in some ways, they're decreasing a portion of the building mass relative to what's possible, but they're also changing the uses, and suddenly we're talking about residential units instead of more institutional type uses. The clause in the MDP is really saying that where there's a degree of significance of change in a neighborhood, it should come back, it should come at this level, and these kinds of council needs to put their mind to these sort of changes in a neighborhood and whether or not that's acceptable. So it's, the MDP is sort of directing us into this difficult discussion that we're having now. So I'm sorry for all of us, but this is, the MDP is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It doesn't say thou shalt approve this or thou shalt not. It says where there's changes like this, council needs to weigh the pros and cons of it.
Thank you.
Councillor Faubert.
Accidents.
Okay. Councillor Graham.
This may be the point in time I get in trouble today, but I just don't know where to ask this question, so.
As long as it's you and not me, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's good. With the regentrification of Canmore, we're getting a lot of complaints about noise and construction times and whatnot. Is there any opportunity to, it is my understanding that right now you can build from Monday at 7 a.m. to Saturday at 10 p.m., which disturbs a lot of people. Is there any opportunity to change that? And this probably isn't the forum for it, but I thought I'd chuck it out there anyways.
So the construction times are a little bit narrower than that.
I know, but I thought I'd throw it out there anyways.
But I will turn over to.
Not much. It is 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and you can request an exemption for Sundays. So it can be 7 days a week, to be clear. But this is not the place to make that change. I don't think we'd want to venture into making a change for one specific project.
Agreed.
If council would like to look at the noise bylaw and making some changes, I would do it holistically over the whole bylaw and not project by project. For consistency. So 2 things on that. One is that the Bylaw Services Department is planning to bring the noise bylaw back to council. It's very out of date and needs work anyway. It's on their radar already for this year, so it will be coming to council at some point. But given that if this meeting ends, we are going to strategic planning tomorrow, and that would be an example of a conversation we could have. I know, sorry. It would be an example of a conversation we could have there in terms of one of the opportunities for what council's trying to achieve in your term. So that's another avenue for talking about it, in addition to when the bylaw department brings it to you, generally.
I was almost certain this wasn't the venue, but thank you for letting me voice my concerns.
As far as this meeting ending, it's not a matter of if, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Okay. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just a quick check-in. The ARP talks about pointing to the land use bylaw about parking requirements. And the land use bylaw states quite clearly that stacked townhomes, 1-bedroom stall for 1 bedroom, 1.5 stalls for 2 bedrooms. So where are we getting this narrative around 1 parking stall per door?
I will confirm it, but I believe there is a minimum of 1 stall per unit and a maximum that allows up to 1.5 for 2 and 3
1.5 for 2
bedrooms.
bedrooms and 2 for 3 bedrooms, which
As
is
a maximum, but not a minimum.
Oh, I see what you mean.
The minimum is 1. And that was the change that was made.
maximum, minimum. Oh, yeah, you're right, sorry.
I do have all 587 pages memorized.
I have them printed off. Thank you.
I most certainly do not.
Any other questions of council? Councillor Faubert.
In the MDP, there's a section on affordable housing and non-market affordable housing incentives. What is density bonusing, and how would does that apply in this situation?
So as proposed as a direct control district, it would be very specific. And the density bonusing policy in the land use, or section of the land use bylaw, does count it as a variance. And variances are generally not possible in direct control districts. They should be in very extenuating circumstances unless the district specifically enabled for that variance to be considered. So it would be a difficult route to go down.
Is this a situation, though, where because the applicant is proposing non-market affordable housing, that there's opportunity for increased density? That's a political question. I'm answering my own question. Thanks, Alaric.
Thank you. Any other questions of council? Okay. So that question of when this hearing will end, I'll give you that answer right now. It ends now. So that's the close of the public hearing. Thank you to everyone who participated, and many who have left or have not been able to stay on. I appreciate everybody participating in what's a very important part of our democratic and our planning process. So with that, we're going to move on now to item D, approval of minutes, which is, I think, the latest we've ever approved minutes. In my, yeah. I know that there is one change that I need to bring up, and that's our town solicitor, Adam Drytick, did not attend that meeting, and so he will have to be removed from the list. Okay. Are there any other changes or omissions? No? In that case, I will move approval of the minutes with that one correction of approval of the minutes of February 1st, 2022, regular meeting of council with that one correction. Call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We're now going to move to item G1 in just one moment while I lock in or unlock my computer. There we go. All right, so item G1 is now us moving towards second reading of Bylaw 2021-07, CRPS, LGMS, ARP. And we've already asked all our questions. There already has been a presentation through first reading and earlier today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go straight towards putting second reading on the table, and then we can have some discussions with that. Just to put this all in context, over the last little while, the town of Canmore is moving to follow suit with other municipalities that, following a public hearing, go directly to second hearing. There's a problem when you extend it too long because you still get a lot of lobbying and stuff going on. Some council can get some information that not others have, and we should be making the decision with the best information in hand. That said, this is council's process. So if anybody wants to be making amendments, we can deal with those. As we know, with a third-party application, anything of too substantive of an amendment should probably lead to denying the application than trying to make a square box fit into a round hole type scenario. But we can certainly have those discussions. Also, if there's, postponement motions or anything like that, that also is fair game as well. So I am going to move that council give second reading to Bylaw 2021-07, Canadian Rockies Public Schools, CRPS, Lawrence Grassi Middle School Area Redevelopment Plan. I'm going to speak in favor of that motion, but I do see Councillor Graham wants to speak, so I will turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually going to move a motion to postpone second reading of Bylaw 2021-7 until April 5th, 2022, and direct administration to work with the applicant on the options to include a need to reside in any future ownership or leasing regimes with the CPR site. I did hear what administration said with regards to where they think that should happen. I would like to hear from council as to their appetite for this now, and I think it would behoove us to give CRPS all the heads up in the world as to what we are thinking with regards to this. This is a very important piece to me, and I believe this community, and I believe a lot of my fellow councillors. The question is, when and where do we do this, or request this, or when do we die on this hill? And I would just like to be as upfront and as clear and concise as possible, and as early as possible, to give everybody the fairest shake. I look forward to my fellow councillors' comments.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Ms. Clerk, do we have that in writing that we could put up on the screen, please? Great, thank you. All right, so we have a motion to postpone on the table. So our comments are now directed to this motion. Speaking to this motion, I can say that I am very supportive of having, if possible, some need to reside to go with the market units. We don't know for sure that it's possible. I believe that there's definitely a conversation to be had to explore that, and I hear an openness from the applicant to do that. I also hear administration's very aware of council's expressed desire that each one of us at some point, or most of us anyway, have spoken to. I don't think that this is the appropriate time to do it based on the response provided by administration. I think that those discussions can be had if this goes to a next step at that time. And there will be other opportunities. I mean, it will have to come back to council, for example, with the land transfer and likely, well, it's a direct control, so many steps of the way. So I would be inclined to be moving ahead with second reading today and leaving that discussion to a future step. But once again, I'm only one vote, so let's see where people are at. Councillor Hillstead.
I concur with Mayor Krausert on everything he said, so I'm just going to say ditto.
Councillor Ma.
I can definitely appreciate where Councillor Graham is coming from. Sometimes having a little more time to process is really helpful. If I could toss this out to the administrative team, do you feel we would be able to undertake these conversations if we did go to second reading? Mm-hmm. as opposed to following through this motion. I'm trying to understand if we will get the same outcome and not have to go for this motion. That's my big piece, and I'm curious about.
So I think, I have to say, I don't think I know. Thank you, Councillor McCallum. I would suggest 3 readings of the ARP today or next month or whenever wouldn't preclude the conversations around some form of work to reside discussion with CRPS, with the applicant. To me, really, what it comes down to in relation to the ARP itself is council willing to consider the land use proposal, the policy that's in front of them today, regardless of where we land with any future conversations around a work to reside arrangement? I can't answer that, but to me that's kind of what this would hang on. If the motion proceeded, we certainly wouldn't be able to hammer out an agreement with the applicant in a month, but we would be able to come back to council with an indication of the comfort level the applicant has with how best to respond to some of what they've heard from council today. And that could be another piece of the puzzle in deciding the next steps with the ARP. But that said, I still think at the end of the day, as I said before, the statutory plan is a separate discussion from discussing tenure related to the units. So it really, to me, comes down to, does council feel they need that question answered to answer the bigger question of the land use concept being proposed for the site?
Thank you. So Councillor Maude, did you want to speak to the motion, or do you want to hear what others say?
I would like to hear more from what the other my fellow councillors have to say. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me in the mic? Thank you. I've been getting feedback all morning. I know that you gave us a heads up about this yesterday, and at the time it seemed like a plausible consideration. But now that I have heard from administration and really thought through the subsequent steps that we have to work through, we have a land transfer to work through, and we still have the regulation within the land use bylaw. And the purpose statement is really going to be where it's at. That's where in my mind, the rubber is going to hit the road in terms of the intent of that land and what we have been able to hammer out between approving ARP, if we approve it, and approving the regulation. So I would say from a technical perspective, I'm not I wouldn't be able to vote in favor of your amendment. I understand the place that you're coming from, though, and I think that place can be addressed in subsequent parts of the process. This is just the beginning. You're going to be seeing more of these people, whether they want to see us or not. So I think that, again, there's still the land transfer, which is really critical to their overall plan, as well as the regulation, and in particular, the purpose statement is always very, very helpful to help guide intent in terms of the land use itself. So I think I won't be able to support your amendment, but I thank you for bringing it forward because it was thoughtful.
Councillor Mera.
Thank you. Yes, I too, I'm same mind of Councillor McCallum and Mayor Krausert, and as Councillor Hill says, ditto. But I do want to say thank you for bringing this forward, because I think the applicant has heard loud and clear what we're looking for, and I believe they would have that in their heads when they move forward, and then we have more opportunity to address it.
Councillor Faubert.
I'm not in favor of this motion to postpone for this particular reason. I think that we have an applicant in front of us who is willing to work on achieving the outcomes that we also have highly valued within us on council, and that is work to be done. What the question in front of us right now is approving an ARP. So, that's the question we should be asking, not can we find a mechanism to make sure that only residents of Canmore have these opportunities? That's a future question to work out. So I'm ready to debate the ARP. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ma.
Just echoing, I appreciate where Councillor Graham was coming from, because I think it was like a just in case sort of situation where something might come down the pipe and we might lose our opportunity. But hearing from administration and my various councillors that, we will still have opportunities to look at these various mechanisms at future points, such as the land transaction piece, the purpose statements. I feel we are still covered. So the motion itself, which was, I think, a great intent, I think that would still happen, even if we move towards second reading. Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
I appreciate all of my councillors' comments and look forward to tabling future motions that I know will fail. But I think we've all made our points. We all know where we're coming from. And I look forward to dealing with this at a future time and voting against myself here shortly.
If that's the case, you do have an option to withdraw the motion. And as long as there's no dissent, then it can come off.
I do want this motion in the minutes.
Okay.
So
Great.
I will not withdraw it.
All right. Very good. Therefore, we have the motion on the table to postpone till early April. And we've all talked very well to that. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of postponing? All those opposed? Motion's defeated unanimously. Okay. All right. Okay, we are back to the main motion then, which is second reading of this ARP. I'm prepared to speak in favor of it. The concerns that we heard most of, in my opinion, were around density, height, and parking. I will actually, deal with each of those partly when I'm speaking for it, believe it or not. The parking is compliant with the land use bylaw. To hold that up against an ARP that is in compliance with our current practice is disingenuous and is really not the problem here. The density and the height, though, are elements of this proposal, and I actually think that they're positives. We are in a transition. We are in a housing crisis. We need gentle densification, which means making more dense. And I believe that this runs a nice balance between, combined with the surrounding fields. We do have the numbers that represent that, while it would be higher than the current density, it's within the realm in the middle of the density of what would be appropriate for this district. So, and the height allows that also to happen in a way that does not cast shadow more than the current allowed heights, does not block view from the ground of those of the mountains from any more than they would be blocked from a 2.5-story building, given the setback into the site. From a planning perspective, I think that this is an excellent proposal. It uses, which is, is it brownfield? I don't know the technical definition, but it's not green space. And it's valley bottom. It is not an environmental concern. It is close to downtown, close to shopping, close to schools, certainly conducive to having people walk, bike, etc. So I think that it's an excellent planning from that perspective. With respect to the non-market options, there's 33% of this project is proposed to be non-market between the employee and the affordable housing, or the vital homes. That is, as has been stated by many, the largest percentage of a project ever put forward by a third party in the history of Canmore, as far as I'm aware. And the only ones that exceed that are CCH's own projects themselves. It's more than the 20% that we set out as an objective in the MDP, and it's certainly more than can be enforced or required of a developer or a private land proposal. It is compliant with the MDP, from my reading, this project, and while I'm very, very interested in exploring whatever opportunities may exist to maximize the number of people that live in the market units, that live in Canmore full-time, can set their roots down here, build up some equity, send their kids to school, I am comfortable that that conversation will be had, and if there is any way to do that, I expect that it will be done. So with that, I will support second reading. Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you, Mayor Krausert. I could just say ditto again, but I won't. I agree with a lot of what you've said. So I agree, parking, it follows our land use bylaw. Traffic was another issue we heard. There will be increased traffic. It's going to happen. How that all plays out, we won't know until it's built, whenever that happens, if it happens. It's, hopefully, because of its central location, there will be more walking, there will be more biking. We're doing a lot to increase our modal shift. We're trying to make better infrastructure for those options because we know that as a community, we have to, because we don't have the space to build bigger roads. Can't pull a Calgary and just buy up everything on the side of the road and make 12 different lanes. And we wouldn't want that. So I agree with those concerns. We're going to have to see how they go. The density, to me, it is appropriate. This is an area we would want to densify because, again, it's a prime location. This is where we want to put density. It's not a wildlife corridor. Yes, the elk like to roam there, but that is a hazard to our kids and to us ourselves. I was down there working the other day, fixing some stuff, and yeah, there was a bunch of elk in the field. Great, but not great. As a kid going to school there, I remember having to deal with times at recess. You couldn't go outside because the elk were on the field, and you couldn't go outside because they might stomp you. So I think it's actually a good thing to build on that site because it will discourage the elk. We put up a wildlife fence around Centennial Park. We want the elk to not go there because the elk don't care. They go wherever they want, and they will continue to go wherever they want. And also, with regard to that green space, when I was a kid, that was the school. That was a parking lot. I remember getting dropped off, walking from 4th Street through the gravel parking lot into my class. So it's only been green since the new school went up. We lost the baseball diamonds, but then Glendale Park has baseball diamonds now, so it was a trade-off. So I think in the end, as much as people say that's a green space that is supposed to be used, it really never was before. It has been for the last few years. Centennial Park is large. It is where kids go for recess. That is where I went for recess. That is not going to change. With everything that Mayor Krausert said, and my little addition, I will be able to support second reading at this time.
Councillor Mera.
Thank you. I too will support this ARP of the, I have to say it once, CPRS LGMS ARP. I was looking for the opportunity. I'm tongue-tied, so for me to say it is like, woohoo. I too, like a couple fellow councillors, went to school There, my husband, my father-in-law, who turns 89 in June, went to the original brick school that is there. I do remember taking my children, one of that Councillor Hillstead went to school with. I remember dropping off there where it was a parking lot. It was where the school bus dropped off kids. It was the school I also went to that is no longer there. And at one point, my principal, Mr. Masenko, was actually the first resident, I would say, on that land. So it was employee housing originally. So there's a lot of pluses. I do like the idea of 20 employee houses, 20 vital homes, the continuity of funding for our future. So my grandchildren are now currently at Elizabeth Rummel School and hopefully will come down to Lawrence Grassi Middle School, and the programs that this will support. Not that that's the main reason here for us, is looking forward to generations. And it'll also provide housing and spots for our teachers and workers to live. So I will be supporting this. So that's, I know there's concerns, but they're going to be addressed and further down the road in the process. So thank you, and I will support.
Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support second reading of the area redevelopment plan. When this first came in front of us, I think I tried to contextualize the decision in the following way. This sets the stage for a significant rezoning of a parcel of land from a public use to a residential, private, almost, I wouldn't say commercial use, but for sale. And those are two really different things. So to go from that public use to that residential use, I wanted to see that a community benefit was maintained. Because public use, by its definition, has a community benefit. And I find from the presentations and the ARP that that community benefit will be maintained through the legacy fund for CRPS, as well as the employee housing made available to its staff. I think the non-market affordable housing vital homes contribution is also a significant community benefit. Yes, there's market housing, but we have to always have a spectrum of supply of housing in our community. And so at a third of what's being proposed, it's significant benefit to the community. With respect to consistency to the municipal development plan, Section 6, Neighborhood Residential Goal Number 2, really speaks to me. To allow for the gradual redevelopment and change of established neighborhoods to provide more housing variety, support the natural evolution of neighborhoods, and enhance the potential of residents to remain in their homes. And when we go to existing neighborhoods, the section after 6.1.9, and we get into the things that get considered when we're looking at a proposal like this in an existing neighborhood, the things that should be considered, and I know that residents of this particular neighborhood have been looking at this list and thinking about, what they see in the ARP and whether it fits. I disagree with those that would say that it isn't sensitive. I think it is sensitive to the density, scale, and character of the neighborhood, including height, massing, and design, for the following reasons. There is a significant setback from the neighboring property, and then the internal buildings proposed would be the ones that have a higher height. And that setback and step back, I don't even know if that's the right term, but the way that the phasing in the site to have that added height in the center, I would define that as sensitive. The list includes other things, including providing open spaces, like providing affordable housing opportunities as well, provision of transit pedestrian infrastructure, management of on-site parking, traffic volumes on local roads. And when I go through the ARP, I find a lot of these things have been considered. And 6.1.11 starts with the following statement. Redevelopment plans and land use bylaw amendments in existing neighborhoods will be evaluated to ensure there are net benefits to the neighborhood or the town as a whole. And while there might be some conflict and some change that's been difficult for that neighborhood, the net benefit of this ARP is a positive for our community as a whole, because of the affordable housing that's included in it. And for that reason, I will be supporting it. I think that there's some things that will come up, have come up, that get dealt with later on in the project. Concerns around servicing, parking, traffic. These are all things that can have reasonable mitigations and can be planned for. But we can't plan for them unless we, as a council, say, the vision to change this parcel of land from this public use to this new use is supportable in our opinion. So that work still has to be done. And I will stop talking now. Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Krauser. Got it right. So I want to start off by saying, as much as we are still in a pandemic, just because I went out and walked the dog and Jason Kenney told us the pandemic was over, we're still in a pandemic, but it's still lovely to see people face to face, and I wanted to actually just be grateful to the universe for that opportunity. This has been, I think, in some ways a really tricky piece for the public, simply because it is private land, but the proponent is a public entity. And so there's that inherent tension between those two facts, quite frankly. But I would like to speak in favor of second reading of this ARP. I believe the density to be appropriate for this location. I have always been a proponent of smart density. You've all heard me preach about it for 11 years. And this today is no different. I believe, and it's a fact, that when you have housing that's adjacent to infrastructure and you insert some density into that, you have the ability to create affordability. And this is what we're seeing in this proposal. You also have the ability to deter certain kinds of buyers as well, which is a kind of interesting as well. This has the ability of being a demonstration project in terms of its centrality in the community as we continue to invest in our transportation options through bicycle, through trails, through bus. This is a market choice for people who don't want a second car. And I will repeat that. We say, let the market do its job, but then we backfill that by having all this parking. And so if you have 4 cars, this is not the place for you to buy. If you have a bike or you maybe don't own a vehicle, this is a great place for you to buy. And I think that we again continue to reverse engineer neighborhoods for a market choice. People choose to have the number of cars they have and live where they need to live. And if they have all those vehicles, maybe these neighborhoods are not the neighborhoods for them. So I do believe this to be an appropriate density. I do believe the parking and solutions around parking will come forward, but at the same time, you know, as buyers or dwellers of this area, you can save yourself $10,000 a year in terms of affordability by getting rid of your second vehicle and making some lifestyle choices. My kids go to CRPS. I've got one that's 2 years away from being on her way out, and I don't actually think my kids will come back to Canmore when they're finished. I think that I can also guarantee they'll never go into public service. But I know that other people do. My daughter, one daughter, consistently tells me, and it's really interesting because I never thought about it this way, you know, when you start school in September and there's the new kids, and you're like, oh, who are the new kids? They're very rarely new kids. And if they come for a year and then they go. And so I think last year Opal got a new kid in the middle of a pandemic, so she couldn't even see the kids smile unless they were outside. But we need to be able to bring and make space for new kids. And so I think that this has the potential of meeting that need. However, I do want to say how very important it is for me that we work really hard to investigate these opportunities for us to pin residency of the market units to residency of the owner. You know, and not just for the first, but for continuous buyers. I know it's possible. It might take political will. It might take political will, like, for all of us, quite frankly. We may all have to sacrifice something for that to happen. But I do believe it's really important to create that market within the market that our neighbors enjoy up the road. And it's not exactly the same, but I believe it can have enough similar characteristics. I think that this development has the ability to support our workforce, which is really what's important to me as well, like not just the CRPS workforce, but our workforce in general. And I know, and I want to speak to this, I have spoken in past about my concerns around the surety of the legacy fund. I hate that word, legacy. But of the fund in terms of the provincial government scaling it back. And I actually think that it's still a possibility, but y'all are big adults, and that will be your responsibility to bear if that happens. And you will be the ones to explain that to the community, not me. So I'm not the boss of you. With all of those items, I will be supporting second reading. Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
I'll keep this relatively short, I think. I too will support second reading for many of the reasons that my fellow councillors have already stated, and I won't go through and restate them. But I do have concerns about density, and I do have concerns about height, and I do have concerns about the character and feel of South Canmore, and we'll get to that here shortly. But this is a very unique project that has incredible opportunities for this community, and I'm excited that you brought it forward to us. And we'll deal with the tough questions here in a little bit, but what an incredible day this has been to have a public hearing in person, to hear the feedback from this community, to hear how many engaged citizens we continually have show up to things like this to give us their perspective and give us to make things better all the time. And I want to say thank you to everyone, to the folks of Canmore, and I look forward to supporting second reading.
Councillor Ma.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I would also like to vote in support of this for second reading. This was a very interesting, innovative project, and you guys brought a lot of different pieces to the table, and there was a lot of background work, I think, on all of our parts done. I know we heard from the community they wanted like completely affordable housing, but given the market demands you guys are talking about, and I understand where you're coming from. The 20 affordable units, thank you for that. The 20 staff housing units, I think that's very helpful. I look forward to continued innovation from you guys as we move through the process. For example, as Councillor McCallum said, this could be such a model community, depending on how it's done, in terms of perhaps the build out, and perhaps in terms of ways to address greenhouse gas emission. I also feel if this project is done in such a way where those 80 market units have, and I know I'm echoing what a lot of people said here, in perpetuity, some sort of setup, so the market within the market, we have locals there, that the so-called perceived ills of densification that some of the people in the community are seeing, those will fade away when they see, 20 affordable units, 20 staff, and 80 units of people that live here full-time with their children contributing to the community. So I'll be voting with the support. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all of you for your comments with respect to the motion. I'm going to now call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move third reading to bylaw. I'll move that council give third reading to bylaw 2021-07, Canadian Rockies Public Schools, CRPS, Lawrence Grassi Middle School Area Redevelopment Plan. And for reasons that we've all stated, I will be supporting third reading. Does anybody have anything they would like to add to what they have said previously? Councillor Graham?
This is my rookie procedure, not knowing. I would like to propose an amendment to restrict the height to that of an R4 designation. I walked by 7th and 7th this morning, and a lot of the same arguments were used for that property that are being used for this one. That the height variance will have little effect on the neighbors. But I disagree. I feel that the height variance does have a noticeable change of character in the property. It does cast shadow, it does restrict views, it does change the nature and feel of any given neighborhood. And South Canmore is a special place. All of Canmore is a special place. Should we get this up on the screen in some sort of way?
Look to the clerk to, did you capture that motion? Okay.
Yeah,
okay?
I think that does capture it, being that I sent it in earlier. And I do look forward to my fellow councilors, councilpersons, comments to this regard.
Thank you. An amendment is on the table. And Councillor Faubert?
Thank you for your amendment, Councillor Graham. I don't think I can support it. When I read the MDP and I'm looking for direction within how a redevelopment within an existing neighborhood should reflect the character of the surrounding neighborhood, it says sensitive to, and it doesn't say that it fits in and below. And the other factor too is that in order to achieve some community benefit, increased density is needed. How do you get increased density without some additional height or space for that density to go? So it's hard to get to the community benefit that we all see as a real win in this application if we scale back the actual physical space for that benefit to occur in. Thank you.
So Councillor Graham, did you have something specific? Because normally I'd give you a chance to close. Okay, so go ahead.
I just wondered if the other R4 neighborhood, very hypothetical, if the other R4 designations wanted to go to 3.5 stories, is that something councillors would entertain?
Councillor Faubert?
That's not what's being asked of us right now. That's a hypothetical. Yeah, we're being asked this site, this land use concept. Right? I completely respect that you don't feel that that additional height in the center buildings fits the character of the neighborhood, and I would disagree. I think it's sensitive because it's within the center, so yeah.
Councillor Hillstead?
I won't be able to support your amendment. I think with how the development is laid out, they took that into account with the setbacks, with having the higher buildings within the internal structure. Those higher buildings are going to more affect the actual development. They're not going to affect the neighbors as much. They will a bit, but they're not. It's not like 7th and 7th where you had everything already built right there and it was right there. It's building a new thing. There's one building that it was set back 12 meters, which is, I'd say, more than 7th and 7th, but I don't have the actual number, so I could be wrong. But 7th and 7th, from what I remember, is the back side of it towards more of the commercial, which it affects more. It does affect the residential to a point. To me, this is appropriate density, appropriate height. yes, it's going to block a little bit of views, but when you're walking amongst the buildings, it doesn't matter how many stories there are, you're not seeing over them. When you walk through 4th Street, 2nd Street, if you're walking in the yards, you're seeing a wall. So yes, it's going to affect people's views, but the moment anything gets built on there, it's going to affect the views. So I can't support this amendment because I think that, again, I asked at the previous council meeting, did they look at doing just 2.5 stories? And they did, and it changes the performas, it changes how much affordable housing can be offered, it changes everything. So this isn't a small amendment, it's quite a large one in my mind, so I can't support it at this time.
Councillor Ma?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just as a question of procedure, am I allowed to ask a question of the proponent in response to Councillor Graham's amendment, proposed amendment? It kind of informs my decision. I just want some more. Yeah.
Okay, I'll allow it.
Would it be possible to speak to perhaps Mr. Sparrow or, because this is a lot of moving parts if this was to happen. If this was to go to that reduced height, could you give me a running guesstimate of what would happen to the unit count? Because I know what would fall off the table. Yeah, I'm just trying to get all the pieces. I figure I should just ask you as opposed to guesstimate. Mm-hmm.
If you can go to the microphone, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Point of order, Your Worship. I just think this is a question that, you're asking for a ballpark, but then you're making a hard and fast statutory decision on a ballpark answer. So I feel like if this is something you really need an answer to be able to go to third reading or to be able to answer or respond to Councillor Graham's amendment, then perhaps that you should put a motion on the table to defer this to a future date to get that information. I don't think it's fair for us to ask the proponent, a nonprofit, right, to be able to just on the fly come up with an answer to something. How is this going to affect your unit count? These are detailed, complex performas that they've been working on for years.
Yeah, I'm ready to rule on your point of order then.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just, you're either in or you're out.
Yeah.
Postpone it or don't.
I think that we can fairly surmise that there would be some reduction in units. It would obviously affect the financial model that somebody would use. It would have a significant impact. I think that's probably sufficient information.
Yeah, I was just hoping to hear that perspective from the proponent. So I understand where you're coming from. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other comments you'd like to make?
I'm okay at this moment. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Councillor Mara.
Sorry, I was a little distracted there for a minute. I don't think I'll be able to support. I think that the proponent or the applicant has made every effort to be sensitive to the community around them. And I'm just weighing the density to units to what could possibly be a view for adjoining or a cross-street resident. I think they've done everything to address that to their ability and still maintain as many units as they can. There are other areas, I know in South Canmore, that it's a wall of a unit, depending on the size and the scope of your house or trees or whatever, there's a lot in a view, so I cannot support this amendment.
Speaking to the amendment, I also cannot support the amendment. It's actually one of the elements of the project that I like the most. It's very smart. It's actually a good way of adding density without actually affecting the streetscape of what you would have if they were all that same height. Because they are designed in a way that if you're on opposite side of the street looking up over a 2.5 or 3-story building, you actually can't see the other building. And that is actually the test. It's not whether you can ever see those units. If you're in the building across the way, you can probably see over the building to that, but it's also designed in a way that your mountainscape is hardly adversely affected at all. So this is, I think, something that's near and dear to this proposal, and I think it's what makes it work. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. I'm sorry I was a little annoyed earlier.
You know what? Points of orders are fair because that's why it's a 7-person council, so I thank you for bringing it up.
I just want it to be procedurally fair for everyone, and I don't think that that was a fair request, especially if your entire decision was hinging on that answer.
Yep.
So the municipal development plan speaks to retention of important views. It does not speak to preserving every homeowner's view. We do not have a fundamental charter right to a view of the mountains from our bedroom. And so as much as I know that everyone loves their view and they come here for a view, you can walk 5 minutes down the road and get a beautiful view that's not from your bedroom window. And so we have to decide, is it important for us to house Canmore people, or is it important for us to house their cars? Is it important for us to house Canmore people, or is it important that people have a view? These are the fundamental decisions that I believe we were elected on in the fall. And for us to continue to hem and haw on these little points really undermines all of the hard work we all did to run to get this spot. The preaching that we did about affordability and being bold and everything else to just be basic. So I won't be able to support that. I've always actually wanted to say this. We do not have a charter fundamental right to a view in our town. We are all blessed to live here. And the fact that we can walk outside of our door and walk 10 meters outside of and see the mountains is a gift in itself. So I will not be able to support your amendment. Sorry.
Councillor Ma.
Thank you. In light of the setbacks and the fact that the taller buildings are nested within, okay, I think there have been steps taken to minimize the impact of height. With respect to the point of order, Derek, I was just seeing where you guys were at with that. There was no intent to put you guys on the spot per se. I just want to see if you guys had a chance to want to talk about that. Because of that, I will not be voting in support of this amendment and look forward to moving forward.
Councillor Graham to close.
Thank you all for your comments. View is one aspect, and I think the very least of it, to be honest. This would have had an effect on density, and density was a concern that we heard from many citizens throughout the public hearing, and it was my attempt to help address that concern to them. Thank you.
With that, I will call a question on the amendment. Those who are in favor of restricting the height? Those opposed? It is defeated with Councillor Graham in support. Moving back to the primary motion, which is third reading of this bylaw. Does anybody have anything that they would like to add to what they have stated previously? Yeah? Councillor Graham, go ahead.
This isn't, we're talking about third reading?
Third reading.
I will be supporting third reading. Again, this is an innovative project. I want to talk a little bit about provincial funding and the constant download of provincial costs onto municipalities, and our job today is to do our best to help alleviate that with the creation of the endowment fund. And as Councillor McCallum stated earlier, it's not our job to police that, it's the public's job and your job to make sure that that endowment fund is successful, is managed well, and serves the children of this community and this community indirectly. It just makes me a little sad that this is the tool we need to do to help make that happen. If this province wants to talk about equalization, I would love to have that conversation, because this town ships off a lot of money to the province, and we do not get that back. That $10 million or whatever that number is, I'm sure would be dealt with rather quickly if we did receive all the money that we did send off to the province. I want to just make that point.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Point made. Councillor Faubert?
I'm just going to have just a quick final comment, because I realize in second reading, I stuck a lot to the MDP, and I want to speak to what CRPS has brought forward and the work that has gone into this. When Trustee Carol Picard spoke to when this first kind of came out in the public realm, that would have been a story that I wrote. And not only did I attend CRPS schools from kindergarten to grade 12, I've had the pleasure of covering school board for well over a decade. And I can tell you, if you want to do your head in, try and understand how education is funded in Alberta. There are so many levers and pulleys and funds and processes, and this is what you qualify for this, and that it's mind-boggling, and I understand why CRPS over the past decade and a half has had to turn into an entrepreneurial school board. And I say that with intention because along the way, your leadership has supported innovation and working towards supporting education and the children in the schools in these communities by doing things that are the definition of outside of the box, I think, for a school board in Alberta, and have been incredibly successful for that. I think this falls in line with that. And for a nonprofit and a public entity to get into development in this town, thank you for your courage. And, first step done, baby. And yeah, I want to thank you for that work, and I want to thank the community for showing up for this public hearing, whether you were in support of the application, whether you were a resident of the neighborhood with concerns around how this would fit into the character of where you live, or if you saw this as the potential to do something amazing and great and more, even if it's not quite feasible. The engagement on this project has been wonderful, so thank you. I'll stop talking now.
Any other comments before I call the vote? All right, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of third reading? Carried unanimously. So I would just like to, before I call a break, I would just like to say that I am incredibly proud of this community showing up both for and against, sharing their opinions in a respectful way, and doing so with great thought. I am proud of the ingenuity that exists in our community, and the potential that this initiative has. I'm proud of the work that's gone into administration to prepare this, and I'm really proud of this council. It's obvious to anybody watching that there's been a lot of reading being done, a lot of thought being given, a lot of listening, and a lot of hard decision making, because no matter what, we were going to make somebody upset. And we take that very seriously, and we have to think in terms of what's in best interest of the community as a whole. And so I'm really proud of all of your work today. The one part that does make me sad in all of these things is that there are going to be some people that are upset, and I just want them to know that they've been heard. We have to decide one way or the other. We have to decide what's in the best interest of the community based on what we are guided by, and I know that's not going to make everyone happy. I hope that as this transpires over the coming months and years, that the benefit will be seen. So thank you, everyone. With that, I'm going to call it's been 2 hours, so I'm going to call a quick break. Let's come back in 10 minutes, And I'm going to huddle with administration to determine what we will still cover today and what we'll have to postpone, if anything. So thank you. All right, welcome back. Now, we've got a number of matters to finish, but I think that they're relatively quick matters. So we'll turn now to item G2, Nonprofit Community Organizations Exemption Bylaws. Ms. Richardson, welcome to council. There you go.
There we go. So I'm going to try not to be offended that no one ever stays for my riveting finance presentations. But with that, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I know, and I greatly appreciate you. But I am here regarding the Nonprofit Community Organization Exemption Bylaws. So this is following up on an agenda item from the last regular council meeting, as you'll recall. There are 3 parts to the motion today. Oh, Cheryl, is it showing my screen? I just don't see my screen. Sorry, I pulled it up on the computer here and didn't tell you. I cheat and look at both. Thank you. So there, now you can see the 3 parts. So first, the council give first, second, and third reading to Bylaw 2022-02, that's a tongue twister, Nonprofit Community Organizations Exemption Bylaw. Secondly, that council give first, second, and third reading to Bylaw 2022-03, the Calgary Scope Society 2022 Transitional Property Tax Exemption Bylaw. And finally, the council rescind motion 69-2018, and that motion was that council direct administration to draft a policy and/or bylaw to guide future council decision-making regarding property tax exemption. So as was discussed at the last meeting, during the review of the nonprofit community organization property tax exemptions for the current tax year, 2 organizations, namely the Canmore Golf and Curling Club and the Calgary Scope Society, were considered not to qualify for an automatic exemption under the Municipal Government Act and the Community Organization Property Tax Exemption Regulation. So in the last meeting, council voted to grant partial exemptions for these 2 organizations. And as a reminder, this needed to be done by bylaw, so the bylaws before you today have been prepared in accordance with that chosen direction. It's all in the report, but at least it's on slides too. So as outlined in the motion, there are 2 bylaws before you today. So the first, Bylaw 2022-02, is the Nonprofit Community Organization Exemption Bylaw. So I wanted to highlight that this bylaw was drafted so as not to be specific to the Canmore Golf and Curling Club and is set up so that if other organizations apply in future years, they can be added to the attached schedule with any relevant proportions or criteria rather than requiring a new organization-specific bylaw every time a new request might be considered and granted. The second bylaw, however, is specific to the organization and the situation for the Calgary Scope Society and the transitional nature of the exemption that council was considering. So it is in effect only for the 1 year and expires December 31st of this year. So that's why there's the 2 different approaches here. Regarding the third part of the motion on rescinding the outstanding council motion, so again, as a reminder from the discussion at the last meeting, on April 3rd, back in 2018, council directed administration to draft a policy and/or bylaw to guide future council decision-making regarding property tax exemptions. So this work wasn't undertaken immediately following the motion, as updates to COPTER were expected shortly from the provincial government. And based on what we'd seen that went out for comment, many of the proposed changes would have helped to address the specific situations that had led council to that motion. It's now clear these updates will not be coming in the foreseeable future and have been delayed. And so as such, in processing these applications, administration did review this outstanding motion as it was pertinent. So while it was considered, administration is recommending this outstanding motion be rescinded. So this is because of several things. Many of the factors and criteria that administration might have thought to include in such a policy or bylaw are already included in the COPTER regulation. And drafting a policy or bylaw that would be consistent and applicable for the vast majority of circumstances that might come before council would be extremely challenging given the massive possible breadth of scope and both scope and mandate of any nonprofit community organizations that might apply. And finally, in a review of exemptions across the province, we couldn't find another single example of decision-making policies or bylaws. All exemptions that we saw that had been granted by council bylaw elsewhere did seem to be reviewed and considered on a case-by-case basis. So in conclusion, again, this is the motion with its 3 related parts surrounding the 2 bylaws and rescinding the related outstanding council motion, and I'm happy to address any questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. And from my review, it appears that all elements captured exactly what I was expecting and what was requested by council. So I have no questions. Council members, do you have any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'm going to move that we give first reading to Bylaw 2022-02, Nonprofit Community Organizations Exemption Bylaw. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will move that council give second reading to Bylaw 2022-02, Nonprofit Community Organizations Exemption Bylaw. Any discussion on the motion? Call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will seek leave of council to give third reading to this bylaw. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will now move that council give third reading to Bylaw 2022-02, Nonprofit Community Organizations Exemption Bylaw. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Call the question. All of those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move that council give first reading to Bylaw 2022-03, Calgary Scope Society 2022 Transitional Property Tax Exemption Bylaw. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move that council give second reading to Bylaw 2022-03, Calgary Scope Society 2022 Transitional Property Tax Exemption Bylaw. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now seek leave of council to give third reading to this bylaw. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I'll move that council give third reading to Bylaw 2022-03, Calgary Scope Society 2022 Transitional Property Tax Exemption Bylaw. Speaking to that motion, we just need to come up with shorter names for bylaws. But of course, we all spoke to these motions when we originally passed the exemption. So all of those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now I'll move that council rescind motion 69-2018, that council direct administration to draft a policy and or bylaw to guide future council decision-making regarding property tax exemption. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Councillor McCallum.
I guess I feel obligated to speak to this since I was on the council that approved this motion. I believe that the explanation from administration as to why we should rescind this motion is sound, and I would be happy to support this motion.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We'll now move, and thank you, Ms. Richardson, for all your work on this.
I'll come up with shorter names.
We're really cool acronyms. So.
I was going to say, I thought you had enough acronyms.
Yeah, exactly. H1, PL 2020-0429, time exemption for Silvertip Block 9. Will anybody be representing on this?
Ms. Wittenko is joining us by Zoom.
Okay. Ms. Wittenko, good to see you. Welcome to council.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This is unique for me, being on video and seeing you guys in council chambers together. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I just have a very brief presentation. Great. Can you see my screen there?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So this is an extension to the subdivision application of PL 2020-0429. This is for Silvertip Block 9. If some of the councillors remember from last year, we also asked council for 2 extensions on the other 2 Silvertip subdivision applications that we had in front of us. This one is a little bit simpler of an extension. The map that I've shown here in front of you is the area of Block 9 of Silvertip. It is right adjacent to Silvertip Road. And they are applying to, or they did apply and received approval to subdivide a portion of Block 9 to consolidate it into a single lot. And this is in preparation for future development in accordance with the area structure plan. This was approved on February 17th of 2021. So in accordance with the Act, they would need to have this plan endorsed within 1 year. So they are seeking a 1-year extension from council until February 17th, 2023 to have the plan endorsed. And the reason for this, even though it looks like a simple subdivision, the road plan that you can see here is going to be registered concurrently with Block 10. And as we are still under detailed engineering design of Block 10, we aren't yet ready to register the road plan. So that road plan is holding up the endorsement of Block 9. Yeah, and so it's required under the Municipal Government Act that council provides all extensions to endorsements or registration periods. And even though council didn't approve the application originally, you are required to approve an extension. So our recommendation is that council do grant this 1-year extension to the endorsement of PL 2020-0429 until February 17th, 2023. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hortenko. Does anybody have any questions? It's pretty straightforward, so thank you. I will move that council grant a 1-year extension to the endorsement of PL 2020-0429 to February 17th, 2023. Any discussion on that motion? Call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Hortenko. We'll now move to item H2, Community Grant Policy Amendment. Ms. Brown, welcome to council.
Good afternoon. I just need to load up my presentation.
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right, long day for everybody, but good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. I'm here today to request approval for a community grant policy amendment. So there are 3 areas of work that this policy directs. It provides governance structure for the community grant program. It directs the community grant selection committee with assessing and allocating municipal funding. And it invites the community to help advance council's strategic priorities. The community grant policy is due for review in 2022. My department worked with Economic Development Department and the Sustainability Business Unit to review the community feedback and explore amendments that meet community need and further council's strategic priorities. The current community grant program is governed by the 2018 Community Grant Policy. And as per the 2018 policy, eligible applicants can apply for municipal funding through 2 streams, an initiative stream and an event stream. Organizations that are applying through the initiative stream may be awarded up to $5,000 in funding to promote or launch a new initiative. Organizations that are applying through the event stream may be awarded one-time funding of up to $10,000 for provincial, national, or international level events. The 2018 policy governed the 2018 and the 2019 Community Grant Program. In 2020, as you're aware, there is a pandemic, and in response, we canceled the Community Grant Program, and we launched the Community Relief Program. The Relief Grant Program provided operational funding to community organizations that were supporting residents that had experienced a financial loss. In 2021, the Community Grant Program was once again canceled, and we launched a Recovery Grant Program. The Recovery Grant Program provided operational funding to organizations that increased vibrancy, and community connection. And then this year, it's due for policy review. To guide the review, comments that administration had received were grouped into 3 overarching themes. Theme 1 is the Community Grant Program does not meet the needs of large international events. These events often take multiple years to plan and need the municipality to be a part of the planning process. These events also have international media coverage and require significant time and resources from the town. Theme 2 is organizations struggle to create a new program. Currently, the policy states that the town of Canmore can provide one-time project-based funding. It needs a clear end and a clear beginning. The committee has seen organizations struggle to find new twists to an established program or to develop a new program or grow a program. And then theme 3, concern that the grant program rewards grant writing skills. And this is common for all grant programs, where small community groups become either intimidated by the application process or they are unable to articulate how their actions align with strategic plans. So based on these 3 themes, I'm recommending 5 recommendations for your consideration. So recommendation 1, remove large international events from the eligibility criteria. When I looked at examples of event grants in other municipalities, they are sometimes categorized based on size, community impact, and required municipal resources. Large events, sometimes referred to as major events, like the World Cup, can have a significant and lasting impact on community. These events are often awarded, involve international media coverage, and require significant resources. The current community grant program cannot provide a meaningful contribution to these major events, and the current process does not consider municipal resources such as staff time or in-kind municipal space. A different and more robust process is needed, and if this recommendation is accepted in Q2, the Economic Development Department will present Council with a new process for allocating major events. The community grant program will continue to allocate both regional and local events. Recommendation 2, remove the second annual grant competition. So when the event grant was first incorporated into a community grant program, a second competition date was added to support organizations that were awarded an event after the grant deadline. This second competition was only for the event stream, not for the initiative. In reality, the second competition was not well prescribed, and organizations that applied to it were not awarded their event. The consequence of that was that a portion of the dollars was always saved for the second competition, but never expended. Recommendation 3, remove one-time project-based initiative from the community grant criteria. The criteria of new initiative or event or one-time project funding was added to the policy to prevent organizations from depending on municipal funding. Unfortunately, it has meant that applicants need to spend time and effort to do a new program or a new twist on an old program. To be eligible for grant funding, all nonprofit societies need to demonstrate that their organization is financially viable, meaning they can't have an operational deficit. Instead of requiring new programs or events, administration is recommending that the town invest in sustainable programs that promote council's strategic goals. Recommendation 4, explicitly incorporate equity, inclusion, and diversity into the grant eligibility criteria. According to the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, equity, diversity, and inclusion is a lengthy journey where organizations need to actively review policy to create sustainable change. When reviewing this policy, it was clear that there's an opportunity to promote a fair and equitable treatment of all people through a municipal granting process. And lastly, recommendation 5, incorporate circular economy principles into the eligibility criteria. So the purpose of this recommendation is to shift our municipal granting process from requesting that the community organizations articulate the link between actions and strategic priorities to granting activities that promote council's strategic priorities. Circular economy activities include waste limiting activities such as sharing, renting, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing, repurposing, and or recycling. And these activities collectively promote economic development, affordability, environmental sustainability, and a sense of belonging. By incorporating these activities into the application process, organizations can simply list their activities, and the committee will assess alignment with the policy. This will also reduce writing requirements. In addition, as both events and initiatives can meet the circular economy requirement, the policy will shift from 2 funding streams to 1 funding stream, which will again simplify the application process. To date, the committee will often move applications between the funding stream based on fit. If Council approves these 5 recommendations, the community grant competition will open mid-March and close on the last business day of April, and the successful applicants will be rewarded funding on or before the end of May. So I'm here today to request 2 council motions. The first is that Council approve the amended community grant policy as presented, and the second is that Council direct administration to return with a recommendation for a major event grant program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Really appreciate your presentation and your work into this. I had a couple of questions, and I don't think they're necessarily for you, they're more for Ms. Hyde, because there's a couple of things I noticed that I think are editorial in nature that I should have caught in agenda review. One is, I noticed that the numbering scheme changed quite drastically between the previous policy and this one, which isn't a problem in itself, but there's reference back and repealed, and it's tough with concordance if you have a different numbering that's something that you don't know what it relates to. If you look at the numbering scheme to see, make sure that there's good concordance and follow through, is that an editorial type thing that you could look at?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Yes, we can do that without a council motion. That's your question?
Yes.
Just to give a little bit of explanation, we're moving to a model with our bylaws and our policies where the headers aren't numbered and the sections are numbered chronologically. And this follows the way that provincial legislation is set out, and it is to provide continuity so that when you're looking back at old policies, section numbers aren't meant to change over time. But I recognize with the transition, it looks clumsy. So I think, to your point, I think in the repealed sections, I think we should note which section number it was that was repealed.
That would solve it for me, because right now, if I look at section 5, it says repealed, and it's actually referring to a 4-point something or other.
Agreed.
And so if it said previously 4.2 repealed or something like that, then you would get that.
Yeah,
so
agreed.
Thank you.
And I think that's what we're going for.
Great, thank you. So that solves that, and that's editorial. And I do have a second one, that paragraphs 22 and 23 are identical.
That might just be an error.
Yeah,
I'm just opening it.
I would think that 22 needs to be removed, and then everything below it needs to be just renumbered.
Yes. Editorial is just an error.
Exactly.
I apologize.
So I'm sorry, I should have picked that up in agenda review, but I didn't. So those are editorial. Those are all the questions I had, because I was fine with the substance, which of course I had looked at before. So thank you. Any questions? Dr. Cottle, did you have something you wanted to add? No, okay. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A quick question. Is $25,000 enough for a major event grant program to be successful?
So this is new for us. We're not exactly sure, but what we're thinking is that we can use that money and leverage it over a couple of years, potentially. So Ms. McClett might have more kind of a thought process when she presents to you in Q2, but we're not thinking it needs to be isolated to 1 year, and that might make it stretch a little bit more.
And then do we currently have these major events, are they currently in the grant process?
Yeah, so currently the Community Grant Selection Committee does allocate dollars to major events. And usually it looks like a drop in the bucket.
Yeah. In the past, those kinds of requests would come directly to council, though. Is that not right?
Prior to the event grant starting, yes. And so that's why they incorporated the event grant stream into the community grant program.
Awesome. Thank you. That was it.
I just might add a little bit of context there. It actually started with the Alberta Winter Games, where we gave $50,000 a year for 3 years. And then TCK, when it was CBT, for acronym continuity, ABC, they were handling all of that. And it was only when CBT fell apart before TCK that we brought this in-house. And so that $50,000 has been a consistent contribution over time, but how it's been given out has changed over time. And this is really in response to feedback from those major event groups that they need a different model.
Excellent. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this question might be for Ms. Brown, or perhaps on the clerical piece. It says under eligibility, number 11, organizations must demonstrate good financial standing. And then we go down to, say, 15H, it talks about the organization is not in good financial standing. So I'm just trying to understand, is that redundant, having that H piece? Or, because I'm trying to understand is like, if someone's going to apply, like, do they automatically need to demonstrate good financial standing? Or is this trying to capture some situation where
the confusing...
I'm just trying to catch that part, that's all.
The confusing thing, and Ms. Hyde, please feel free to interrupt, is that 10 and 11 is under eligibility, and then 15, there's a new heading, and that is not considered eligible. And so 15H is if you're not in good financial standing, you're not eligible.
I'm just, okay.
So that would be potentially an added, because there's no header there that we saw. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I was just trying to capture a unique situation in our edge case that we didn't know. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And anyone else with questions? Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate your work. So I'll put the motion on the table that council approve the community grant policy as presented. I will be supporting that motion. I think that these are always evolutionary type things, and you learn and then you adjust, and I think that this has been some good learnings and some really good adjustments with the adding of the circular economy and the inclusivity. Would anybody else like to speak to it? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd be happy to support the motion. You know, I sat on the community grants, I was a board committee through the CSAC committee over, how old is my child? 17, 18 years ago. And that was when community grants were first sort of being funneled out to the community. How many times can I use community and grant in 1 minute? Okay. So I agree with you. There's been an evolution in the policy over time. And I remember when we created the first one policy that was actually a part of the discussion, that we knew that it would ebb and flow and change with the community. And here we are with ebbing and flowing. So I'd be happy to support the ebb and the flow.
Thank you, Councillor McCallum. Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you, Mayor Crosert. Thank you for the presentation. I'm happy to support this. These are a lot of good changes. Having sat on the committee since I've been on council and still sitting on the committee, some of these changes will make things a little bit easier, specifically with the not having to have events come up with new ideas every year. I know it'll make it easier on our community members that apply to these, because it gets tricky to try to come up with new things all the time. So I think this will be a good change, so I'm happy to support it.
Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Brown, for your presentation. And I want to thank you, the committee and administration, for your hard work on continually improving this process and the policy that directs the process. I think that we see an evolution in terms of how the types of events in our community that we've supported, and the way the changes and improvements here, I think, help us further along the road of understanding what events we have and what's the best way to support them. I think the one-time project-based initiative restriction being removed could create some great potential for organizations that need some funding but didn't fit within that category. And I also really appreciate the circular economy principles and opening up the eligibility criteria for equity, diversity, and inclusion. So these are great changes, and I can't wait to see how events respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will now move the related motion that Council direct administration to return with a recommendation for a major event grant program. I'll certainly support that motion. Would anybody like to speak to it? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Okay, we'll move to item 3, appointment of Assessment Review Board General Chair. Does anybody want to speak to this?
Do you require someone to speak to this?
I think it's pretty straightforward.
Unless you have any questions.
We should have done it. We didn't do it. Now we're going to do it.
And we don't really need one, but they're making us have one.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So, yes, the Assessment Review Board needs a general chair as per the MGA. It doesn't have a lot of things to do in a community of this size, but it needs to be there just in case. I'm willing to have my name stand forward with that. I have most experience of anybody on the board, and I'm easy to contact. I'm here all the time. So with that, I will move that Council appoint Mayor Sean Krausert as the General Chair of the Assessment Review Board until December 31st, 2024. Anybody like to discuss that motion? Councillor McCallum.
I don't want to discuss it. I'm sure you're qualified, Your Worship. I just wanted to make a correction in the report where it states that I only have 1 year of experience, when in fact I have 2.
That's twice as much.
I know, double, 50% more.
Excellent. Well, that's noteworthy.
That is,
so
thank
that will be corrected in the official agenda. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Seeing no more discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we will go to item 4, FRIAA Grant. Chief Mertens, how are you?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. Welcome to council. And thank you for your patience today. You've been on, but I guess, in your profession, you're used to being on call.
It's how I live my life, yes.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. I will hopefully keep this very short and sweet for you. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Here today to request Council's decision and direction to apply for another round of FRIAA grant funding. The process is up again, and this time our plan is to apply for 2 separate grants. The first grant will allow us to update the existing Town of Canmore wildfire mitigation strategy that was last updated in 2018, but with all the changes that have happened around town and the changes and the work that we have done with fuel modification processes, we feel that it's time to update that plan. The second request, or the second grant submission, will be to develop a strategic level wildfire preparedness guide and update our structure protection plan that we currently have in place. But just by updating all of these plans, we'll be we'll be able to, better reflect what we've done so far, and it'll allow us an opportunity to take a better look at what steps we need to take next.
Thank you. And with the one recommendation to approve the submission of expression of interest, that covers all the grants that you need?
Yes.
In both parts? Okay,
Yes.
very good. Is there any questions? Seeing none? Oh, Councillor McCallum?
In the discussion part of your report, thank you for presenting, you talk about the fact that there is no opportunity to apply for vegetation management.
Right.
Is that something generally we've been approved for every year? Is this the first year we haven't been approved for it?
Well, so the last couple of, FRIAA releases grant applications twice a year typically. And we saw this last year as well. In the spring application process, they don't want any applications for fuel modification.
Of course not, they don't want to do it in the summer.
And yeah, and that's the fuel modification is the bulk of the grant funding. So
Right.
it's possible that there just isn't enough money to evenly distribute if people apply for or for fuel modification. So they did it last year as well. So it wasn't a really big surprise that they said no fuel modification requests. We do expect that in the fall application, that fuel mod requests will be back on the table. And if they are, then I'll be back.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Chief Merton.
Thank you.
I will then move that council approve the submission of an expression of interest for the 2022 Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta grant. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. I will now move that council go in camera for item K1. Yes, so just for on the record, we'll stop the live streaming. Will we be going back on camera for the CAO?
Oh, right, yes.
Okay.
Yes, you know what, we will not stop now.
Okay, we're just going to go on a break. All right, so I move that we go in camera. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. We're now in camera. Yeah. So now we're, okay, so now I will announce that we're going to recess to deal with the last item shortly. Yeah, you'll probably be at least 20 minutes. All right. Okay, thank you. See you back here. Adjourned our meeting. I'll wait to see if we're back on. We are on. So we will resume the meeting of regular council. We're now moving to item H5, appointment of Chief Administrative Officer. Ooh, I'm getting all giddy already. I would like to speak a little bit to the process that we've been through in the last few months. We had a national recruiter, Legacy Partners. They put out a search across the country. We received 97 applications. Of those, there were 20 very highly qualified candidates that the recruiter went and called each and every one of them. We were given a list of 11 by the recruiter as potential interviews. We decided to interview 7. We then interviewed 3 of those again for a second time. And what we're doing tonight is putting the final dot in the I and crossing the T as to the decision that council is recommending to itself and that we're going to vote on right now. So I'm going to put the motion on the table that council appoint Sally Cottle to the role of Chief Administrative Officer for the town of Canmore and authorize Mayor Krauser to execute the CAO contract on behalf of the town. Now I'm going to be speaking to that in a little bit, but I'd like to just say that out of an amazing array of qualified candidates, and actually this is something that Canmore is particularly good at, and that's attracting great candidates. And that's why it's not a surprise that there's an internal hire. Because we attract the highest quality people because of this wonderful place to live. We get applications that a town of this size wouldn't normally get. But there's an attraction to this place in these mountains. And so we have a very highly qualified administration. And I'd put our administration up against any administration anywhere, any day. So, yeah. So we hired Sally, and I'm going to be saying a few words later, but I'd like to give the opportunity to council if anybody would like to speak to that motion. Where to start? Okay. Councillor Ma.
It was definitely a big, daunting process as a rookie councillor, seeing all this stuff going on. There's a lot of rhetoric in the community before about, you got to go external, you got to look external, blah, 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 blah. And as we went through the process, it just became very clear that we had a candidate with a ton of compassion and emotional intelligence and a deep love for this community. And it was a choice of clarity as we got there. Thank you.
Councillor Faubert.
When I first started at the Outlook, it was 2006, and that was the same time that Sally started with the town of Canmore. And over the past 15, 16 years in our respective roles, I think we have watched each other grow, and it's been an honor to work with you in any and all the roles I've worked with you. And I think that we've made the best choice possible for the community and for the organization. So the work begins now, I guess.
Councillor Mera.
Thank you. Yes, it was quite the process, and the bar was set previously quite high by Ms. DeSoto. And I would just like to say that Sally just kept rising to the top and meeting that bar, and we look forward to and happy to work with you in the future.
Councillor McCallum.
I first met Sally around a kitchen table in the 2010 election, and I had never met her before, and I didn't realize how deeply ingrained in this community she was already. And then I got elected. Fool. And over the years, I've really grew a bond with Sally, actually, and sometimes we fought and challenged each other. But what I really appreciate about you, aside from your vast intelligence, is your capacity to love, your capacity to understand, being able to say when you're wrong, telling other people when they're wrong. I really like that, actually. I just look forward to, I just can't believe all the things we're going to accomplish in the next 4 years. So thanks for coming.
Councillor Hillstead.
Well, I'm just very happy that we were able to find such a great candidate. I'm glad that, we looked externally, like as Jeff said, with the rhetoric in the community, people were pushing for that, and we did, and it didn't matter because Sally was the best one. She's got some big shoes to fill. So again, thank you, Lisa, for all the time. It was great being able to have both of you and the rest of admin just for my first term on council, and to continue to get to know you guys more and just to keep going with this admin team is just an honor. So thank you.
Councillor Graham.
It's been a long day. My brain's a little fried. That was the shortest public hearing in the last 6 months. Sally, you and I have talked a little bit about imposter syndrome this last little while. And we all deserve to be here. And you deserve to be here. And I know we're in good hands. And thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you, Council. And before I call the vote, this is the way it's going to unfold over the next few minutes. We are going to vote. And then, because this is an official meeting, I will be adjourning the meeting. After that, I'm going to invite Sally forward, and she and I will sign the contract. And then I'm actually going to say, we're going to say a few words and recognize Lisa, and then we're going to say a few words with Sally. And I want everybody to know that mic's going to be on, and if anybody wants to either then or any time come and tell a Sally or Lisa story, go for it. But it's just going to be basically mingling, visiting, and if anybody wants to tell a story. So that's how it's going to go. And with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I will... I will now move adjournment of the meeting. All those in favor? Carried unanimously.